Gee, that's a really good question. And yeah, I've never been asked that question. It's a very, very interesting one. I need to reflect on it more, but DVDs. I love someone who's kept their DVDs.
Thank you. I'm a
Yeah,
product of the Blockbuster generation. I worked there for
yeah.
I tell people it was the best job I've ever had, and unfortunately, when it closed down, that's kind of where that began. Do you have many yourself? Do you still try and
I
keep hold
do.
of them?
I'm a bit of a tragic with the Criterion collection.
I love it. I love it.
And I just like, even though I actually subscribe to it online, I'd like to
Mm,
play the DVD and have all the extras and read everything. And
yeah.
yeah, it's just it's sort of I'm happy to pay more for it because you get so much more.
I agree.
Yeah,
And I think there's something
yeah.
I was talking to someone about it a few weeks ago. There's something tangible about holding the disc. It also almost has a bit more purpose when you go and pull something off the shelf and you put it into the player, and especially when you're showing it to other people. I kind of love that feeling
Yeah.
as well.
No, it really does. It's like I mean, I think that's why books are so important to keep. It's sort of that's your reward for
Mm,
having read it.
I love
And
it.
yeah. So anyway, that's music to my eyes, so to speak.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm glad. I'm very glad, and
Yeah.
I love talking to people who are in the same
I've got
boat.
a very dull background. I'm in a hotel room somewhere on the Gold Coast, so sorry about that.
No apologies at all. I know
Yeah.
because you had the Brisbane Q&A last night, if I recall correctly.
Monday night, and then we've got
Monday,
the
yes.
Gold Coast one tonight, and then
Fantastic.
cinema release starts Thursday.
Thursday, so it's all
Yeah.
happening. How is the response in the Q&A sessions? I always find that they're very interesting because you're kind of showing people who are wanting are keen to see it early. What has that reception to the pool been like in these Q&A
Well,
sessions?
it's really interesting because we launched at Sydney Film Festival
Yes.
back in June, and we weren't sure whether or not it was a very sort of Sydney centric story.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
then we since went to Cinefest over in Margaret River, that film festival, and Byron and Sunshine Coast and Adelaide. And what's been so wonderful is just how it's speaking to a very broad audience,
Yeah.
and not just swimmers.
Mm,
And the most surprising thing is how it's extracting quite an emotional response.
yeah.
And I think when I go back to sort of the intent of it, coming out of COVID, I was looking for a happy film that was sort of going to be about community because when it's taken away from us, we yearn for it. And I saw in COVID that we all really miss being together. We're very social creatures.
Yeah.
Anyway, the response is people are quite emotional that they're either part of a group and they're valuing it even more,
Yeah.
or if they're not, they're using words like I'm yearning for to be a part of it, or I'm envious, or quite jealous, and that their lives suddenly feel empty. And
Mm,
I didn't expect that. Um,
wow.
and then there have been sort of the odd ones, or a couple of very emotional ladies actually in Sydney who
Mm,
came up and said, "Look, we don't swim, but we're part of a book club, and I feel that this film summarizes everything that we're about, and
yeah.
I value it even more highly now, getting together."
Yeah.
So it's I mean, you never know. Everyone sits in a different seat, and it's a very non-traditional documentary, and especially for
Sure.
us because we make pretty heavy social impact ones. We thought actually maybe it's time just to let people sit and look at the waves and
Yeah.
contemplate their own life and put joy into audiences. So yeah, it's we seem to have been sort of getting a positive response just because it's such a simple, happy film.
It
Mm.
truly is. I think that I felt that feeling as well, that sense of community really played on screen. And then, like I said, just sitting and watching the waves, there's this really nice slice of life element to the pool. Because I've seen a few of your documentaries before, and you're right, the social commentary that they have is quite intense. It's important, but it's intense and
Mm.
to watch. Well, how aware of you were the community aspects of the icebergs and this pool area? Or is that something that when you were looking to make this sort of nicer community film, did you always know that that was going to be there when you approached them?
No, and it's a really sort of good question because I think sometimes you go in with a hypothesis, and I thought it
Sure.
was going to be sort of more just like we thought the pool was going to be the central character, and we thought there'd be the odd sort of story, but I never sort of appreciated the breadth of the community and the stories there and
Mm.
how much people would actually open up to us and
Yeah.
tell us things that they hadn't told anyone else before. And that was really intriguing. You know,
Yeah.
when Jason starts talking about his depression, he
Mm.
obviously was sort of wanting to do it, and because we'd been there for a year, that people sort of felt safe about it. And Donna, who had the ovarian cancer, she
Yeah.
wanted to share her message because she thought actually this will be good for other people going through it. And that was a real surprise. But I think I didn't also get a sense of the importance of that community to each of them,
Mm.
and that if they all have sort of WhatsApp groups like so many others do, and if someone hasn't turned up for a few days, they'll actually call them, and I
Wow.
think that
Yeah.
was really so many people. I mean, there's a lot of loneliness out there in the community, and I think
Yeah.
that was a much sort of stronger element that I hadn't appreciated is just how much everyone's looking out for each other and the importance of a community because
Mm.
swimming's my main sport, but I sort of
Sure.
swim alone and I've never really been a part of a swimming community, and I thought there'd be much more of that.
It's so interesting, and it's the acceptance that you feel
Yeah,
immediately. Even
yeah,
as an audience member, there's this acceptance you feel into the icebergs, despite it's funny you say that. I'm a rugby boy from my whole life, and a couple of injuries, I can't play anymore. And I did a triathlon a few years ago, and me and my friends started swimming together to train, and it was
yeah,
incredible. It was the exact same thing, just this immediate acceptance into this community of I thought I was just going there to do laps and be in my
yeah.
own head for a bit, but it's just such a beautiful community in that regard.
And I think
Yeah.
what it does, and you would have found it with the try, is you suddenly have a common language,
Yes,
and you're
absolutely.
not like again in every community at Icebergs, as one of the guys says, you've got bankers, you've got council workers, you've got that ordinarily their conversation mightn't be the same. But
Yep.
the other thing that really surprised me is how many hours people can talk about swimming
Yeah, yes, yes.
or cycling, or yeah, I used to row at school, and the most repetitive things, and you
Yeah.
can just talk about it for hours. And
Hours.
I'm guilty. I suddenly find myself doing the same thing. But I think that's a really important thing, and that's coming
Mm,
back to the lady who said it's about our book club. Their
yeah,
common language is the book they've read, or if you're
yes.
watching movies with friends, you'll that's the great thing about still going to the cinema as a shared experience. You've got this common language to actually talk about, and
Yes.
and I think that is sort of the one of the strongest things about a community too.
And I think that's one of the strongest things I took from the documentary as well, is that that community is everywhere, and I think that's beautiful.
Mm.
I'd love to talk about sort of the visual aspects of the film because I think this is a very cinematic documentary. I think some of the shots are very purposeful in the way you frame things. I like the slow motion of people swimming. I love the bird's eyes of the pool, but even the group, the swimming group who are together, and you're sort of watching them in this very cinematic way, and it feels different to what I guess I would assume is this fly on the wall handheld documentary style. I'm curious as to whether it was narrative reasons or just aesthetic reasons as to why you chose to make this a very cinematic looking documentary.
I guess it's all of the above, and we did. We
Sure.
wanted to make it a big cinema experience, both in terms of the way it was shot, but
Mm.
also the sound mix. And we can
Yes.
talk about that because it's with the music and the sound. It was I've never sort of been involved over all the films with something as big as that. But
Sure.
Ben Cunningham, who is our cinematographer, he's traditionally a wildlife photographer or cinematographer,
Ah.
and he's worked with me on a number of films,
Mm.
but we thought, let's do this in a very non-traditional way.
Right.
And I don't know if you've seen the Konichikawa film Tokyo 1964.
I've seen clips of it. I'm aware of it though.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, I reckon it's possibly the best sporting film ever
Mm.
made. And we got a lot of clues from that because when he brought that out, the Olympic committee hated it because it was
Yes.
so non-traditional. And within it, it was very European sort of camera style. He'd just let the athletes move in and out at times. And we thought, well, once we decided to make the pool the central character and have these sort of 30 sets of arms and legs, we said,
Mm.
let's try and make the characters more sculptural.
Right.
So, and as you were alluding to, like some of the early scenes, we've just got a shoulder or a little bit of hair on someone's back, or
Yeah.
with a skipper. We're just seeing his head going up and down, and we thought that was much more interesting. So that they were sort of sculptures in their own right.
Mm.
And we thought that lended itself also to the meditative intention of it, that we thought there'd be some beautiful opportunities just to sit with the
Yeah.
camera. And a lot of that was dictated to by the morning. And it was
Sure.
interesting, Nick, because the first sort of few weeks we were so tempted to keep moving the camera,
Right.
documentary style. We said, no, let's just set and we'll be much more, rewarded
Mm.
by having that discipline of not trying to capture everything, but really trying to capture something. And
Wow.
one of the early scenes, we call it the purple tumble turns. The sky was just purple, and we went as far back in one corner, put on a 400 mil lens,
Mm.
and just watched these swimmers turning.
Wow.
And and we had no realization, but suddenly there's a step in the corner of the pool, and it's almost like this mermaid came up out of the water, and
Yeah.
from that we created a whole scene, and Paul Charlier, the composer, created music around the waves and everything. But had we moved, we wouldn't have been able to capture a whole hour of that, which is compressed into a few minutes. So
Sure.
yeah, it was very deliberate, and I think it was very much sort of within the intent.
Yes.
And we
Yeah.
also Ben's got incredibly high-end equipment, so we shot
Okay.
most of it on the Sony Venice, which
Okay.
is the camera that they shot Top Gun Maverick on,
Oh
and
wow.
so
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
incredibly high-end, but quite small. And then he had a beautiful set of prime lenses and others at a range. And then we used about seven different cameras, and one of them, which we hired in for a couple of days, was the one that shot at 1,000 frames per second, which we used in some of the butterfly scenes and the
That
diving
was one that
ones.
stuck out to me. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And
Uh,
we thought, just that was honoring both the swimmers and the water and the
mm.
shapes that, it makes at that level. So,
That's
so that was
fantastic.
quite exciting. And then, as you alluded to with the drones, we sort of wanted to make them almost more sort of portraits. So we moved
Right.
them at times. We didn't want it to look like an ad for Tourism New South Wales or whatever, but we
Mm.
so we tried to be as disciplined as possible and just again get a snapshot of what was happening. But every now and then we did some moves there. So it was
Yeah.
a blend of everything. But
Yeah.
we wanted it to really visually tell the story first.
Yes. Oh well, it absolutely does. And you mentioned the sound mix briefly as well, and the score. But obviously, you've curated this soundtrack that it works for itself. It's such an incredible soundtrack. But you do make a point of it in the opening credits that it features all these songs there. I'm curious
Yeah.
to know, how do you balance the emotional feeling of soundtrack and score from your composer, because they both work so well with each other in different moments. But how do you find that balance of soundtrack and score?
In this instance, it was when there was something presented to him. So Sally, our editor, we were sort of editing some of the scenes concurrently. We'd film them, and then that
Mm.
purple tumble turns, for example,
Sure.
we were still filming, and she put that together, and then we sent it over to Paul, and
Mm.
he came back, and that was where he really started trying to. So the stuff he composed. He really wanted to ensure it was within the rhythm of the water always.
Right. Wow.
And so when the waves came over, you'd have this big bass drum and everything.
Yeah.
So it
That's
was really
incredible.
reacting to that.
Yeah.
And then we also brought in the layers with the sound mix. So
Mm.
one of the most dramatic scenes is that huge storm,
Yes. Yeah.
and it was quite a bland grey day. And I guess this is where it all came in, that with when we got into the color grade with Angela Sarassi, I said we felt it was like a deep Atlantic blue. So
Right.
rather than grey, and so we color graded it to be this dark, menacing blue. And then suddenly all these horses started jumping out of the waves, and it was extraordinary by putting that contrast in. Then when we got into the sound mix, Andy Wright, who's the most incredible mixer, he got an Academy Award for Hacksaw Ridge.
Oh
So
wow.
he's got a
Yes. Yeah.
got a ton of sort of sound. So we always started with the waves because we had to, because we just had a boom. We knew what the sound was, and we were there, but we had to recreate so much of it to get it bigger.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so we always started with the waves, and then he brought in a lot of actually military sounds.
Mm.
And then when we started, because we hadn't seen it till the grade, these horses jumping out, he actually had galloping horses, which sounded very rhythmic.
Yeah.
like waves in it,
Oh my
and no one
God.
would notice. But then
No.
he said to me, "What do you think that is?" And I said, "That sounds like this incredible tumbling wave." He said, "No, it's galloping horses." So
That's
so
incredible.
it was very layered, and then what we wanted to do, and it was a bit cheeky up front, putting all the
Mm.
music there, but very much like they did in the 60s, we were sort of trying to get a palette, and I kept coming back to the 60s. Whenever I walked into Icebergs, I felt like I was in the 60s. And,
Yes.
the 60s was a decade where um, uh, surf culture and beach culture started in Australia, and we had
Sure.
our own surf band, the Atlantics. But also in a bigger sense, I was sort of thinking, why is that relevant now? And thinking, well, there were some pretty tough elections in the 60s, and it was a decade of war and a decade
Mm.
of nuclear threats and uncertainty and protest.
Mm.
Um, and that's very much where we are now. But
Yes.
also, when you think of the 60s, there are these incredible pockets of joy and happiness and flower power
Yeah.
and Beach Boys and surf culture and all of that. And I thought that's actually what Bondi represents at a
Yeah.
moment when we're coming out uh, of COVID, and we've got incredible uncertainty, and who knows
Sure.
what's happening, with elections around the world, etc.
Yeah.
Um, Icebergs is actually a metaphor for this pocket of joy,
Yeah.
and not only you can go in there, but once you dive in the water, you can have the troubles of the world on your shoulders, but once you finish that swim, you get out and you
Yeah.
just feel totally different. And we wanted the film to sort of feel like that. You could start it. That's also why we have a very long opening sequence to
Yes.
the classic Cream song, "I Feel Free," because we wanted people just to take time to settle in. And it's with our concentration spans, it does take time.
Of
Whenever you
course.
go to
Sure.
the theatre or something, the first 15 minutes can be a blur.
Yeah.
We had this long sequence so that people just got a sense of the rhythm of the film and a sense of the style and the music. And so with the 60s music, we then used the 60s font, and the
Mm.
color palette was very much driven by old Peter Stuyvesant ads and Gidget films and the surf
Right. Yeah.
films,
Yeah.
and the way we sort of shot it also just sort of with that longer sensibility that was very much categorized of the 60s. So
So good.
anyway, not that
Yeah. I love
people notice it, but it was very much that you clearly did, and that was very
it.
much the intent of it.
It's
Yeah,
so fascinating to me. I love finding
yeah,
out things like that.
yeah.
I know it's kind of like a how the sausage is made sort of question, but I think it's just so fascinating. I know people out there will also be intrigued by it. I'll close out on this, and we've spoken multiple times about how the pool it means something more. It's a community, but other people, especially who've responded to the film, have their pool, whether it's the book club, like those ladies you mentioned.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know in your life what has been your pool. What has been the thing that you have found and fostered the most community out of?
Gee, that's a really good question. And there are times in my life where I'm actually in the camp that says, God, I wish I wish I had a community.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Because a lot of I walk a lot, and that's alone, and I swim a lot. It's having spent a year at Icebergs. I really feel in a funny sort of way like I'm known and everyone says hello, and that's the
Wow.
first swimming community that I've been a part of. I think it was a lot around football, so
Mm.
and also the band scene. I grew up in Melbourne in the 80s, and there was an incredible band scene, and a group
Yeah.
of us would always go there.
That's awesome.
Football's been a big thing, going with friends to the football.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm sort of in that halfway camp
Sure.
where I've been yearning for it, and I do get it at like I love film festivals, and there's a group of us that go and
Yeah.
chat, and so I absolutely understand the importance
Yeah.
of it. But yeah, I've never been asked that question. It's a very very interesting one. I need to reflect on it more, but I think that's a
Sure.
very that it is. I perhaps have been yearning for it more than having it.
I think I sit in that camp as well. I like the idea of it as well, but for me, mine was rugby growing up. I
Yeah.
remember that feeling, and I yearn to go back to it, but I need to find something that has that as well. That's not also going to
Yeah.
destroy my body at the same time. So, Ian, thank you so much. I think I've gone over a little bit what I told
Not at
Tracy
all.
on
Great to
schedule. So,
chat, Nick. I
uh,
really enjoyed it, and let's swap some film ideas sometime. I love your DVD collection. I'm most envious. So
oh,
yeah.
thank you. I appreciate it. But no, that
Yeah.
would be great, and I hope we get to do this
Yeah.
again for whatever next projects come up, Ian. Thank you so much for your time. I know it's a
Fantastic.
crazy schedule. Thank you
No,
so
not at
much.
all. Great to chat, Nick. See ya.
Appreciate you.
Bye.
Talk to you soon. Bye.